Welcome back. Today I'm reading chapter 14 of Junior Blaze Birth of a Hero. Don't forget to check out Chilled Cow for your daily musical needs, whether it be studying, cleaning, relaxing, whatever you may be up to. And let's dive into this, alright? Chapter 14. Diedrich smiled at Emily as they made their way through the back roads of the small town. They had spent the last few hours traveling. He was filled with pride at the moment from the way his daughter had taken charge of the plan and executed it nearly to perfection. She picked up the slack where Emily refused, and he decided to focus on the positive. He praised her for getting involved and for getting close to the Stevens. That had allowed them to locate the city of Cedarcrest and put them one step closer to finding Arthur. Diedrich had purchased a large box truck, and they had turned the back into a traveling laboratory. There were two huge tool chests against each wall, a makeshift work table between them, and hanging from the ceiling were several cast iron shackles dangling freely. The morale in the truck was sky high as Diedrich pulled into the gas station near downtown. "Do you want anything?" Diedrich asked Erica as they both jumped out of the truck. "I would love a raspberry slush," Erica exclaimed, making her way to the fuel pump to fill up. Diedrich nodded in acknowledgement and walked in the double doors of the establishment. He was mildly surprised by how extensive the layout was, considering the rather quite small design of the building. He picked out a few snacks of candy bars and chips and got the frozen slush for his daughter. There was a young Asian woman behind the counter checking out the only other customer. Diedrich stepped into line and waited his turn. "How can I help you?" the young girl said in a surprisingly cheerful tone. "Hello there. I would like a fill-up on pump 7. These food items here, and the address of one Arthur Stevens, please." Diedrich spoke calmly, placing the snacks neatly on the counter. Excuse me?" The girl looked confused. She couldn't have been much older than his own girls. "I didn't stutter, dear. Fill-up, food, Arthur Stevens." But I don't... You don't expect me to believe in a town this small that everyone isn't familiar with one another," Diedrich said, staring her in the eyes with a look that made her uncomfortable. "You know who he is. Now come on, tell me." The young woman looked terrified. She was nearly in tears and didn't know what to say or do. She stood there shaking, and Diedrich reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Are you afraid, Becky?" he asked, looking at her name tag. "There's no reason to be scared. Just give me the information I want." He took the pen that was in her hair and slid a stack of sticky notes from next to the register her way. "Just write it down. I won't tell a soul." She hesitated for a moment before quickly scribbling something down and handing the entire stack of notes to Diedrich. Just as he was pocketing them, a group of 4 teenage boys strolled into the shop. Diedrich held his finger to his mouth in a shushing motion before slapping a $100 bill onto the counter. He said a grateful thank you and walked out just as casually as he had entered. He stepped outside and gazed into the early evening sky. The sun would be setting soon, and with the information he acquired safely tucked in his pocket, it would soon be time to make his move. He watched Erica finish fueling the truck and joined her as she climbed back in. "Is it time, Daddy?" Erica asked as Diedrich revved up the engine. "Soon," he replied, shifting into drive and pulling onto the road. "Real soon." They drove around the small town, taking in the sights and learning the ins and outs. There were more than a few dirt roads and hidden trails, and that was sure to come in handy at some point. There was also plenty of wooded areas, like nature had created a barrier separating the counties of the rural area from one another. Once the sun began to go down, they made their way towards the home of Arthur Stevens. They found the long, winding driveway and parked far enough out of sight to be inconspicuous, but still close enough to see the house. Diedrich lifted the sliding door to the traveling lab and stepped inside. Erica followed closely behind, excited to see how she and her father were going to take down their superpowered enemy. Diedrich cleared off the workstation and took a small key out of his pocket. He slid it into a lock that Erica hadn't seen before and lifted the top of the table like a desk, revealing an extra storage space. Inside were more than a few weapons, some more ancient than what Erica had grown accustomed to. There were axes, baseball bats, mallets, a few scattered pistols, and some knives of varying size. In the back, buried underneath many other weapons, Erica caught a glimpse of a glass case with what looked like a muzzle-loader rifle inside. She reached in to grab it, but Dietrich slapped her hand away. "Do not touch that," he ordered, pausing from arming himself. "What is it?" Erica asked, curiosity getting the best of her. Dietrich hesitated. That was my father's, your grandfather's. He thought it would be the last weapon we needed. He was wrong. It failed us." He finished loading up his arsenal and removed a few of the hanging shackles to place in his bag. He leapt from the truck and turned to face his daughter. "Remember, I need you to stay with the truck. Discourage anyone from becoming too nosy. And when I bring Arthur back, have my workstation ready." Erica nodded. She could tell how anxious and excited her father was to finally pull off the greatest victory of his life. She gave Dietrich a good luck hug and he trudged off into the darkness. She watched him until she could no longer see, then sat back down in the truck. Dietrich hiked through the field that led around to the back of the house. He approached quickly, yet silently. There was no reason to compromise the mission unnecessarily. He stopped behind a large tree on the edge of the yard and slipped on black work gloves. That completed his look of black work boots, black slacks, black pullover sweatshirt, and a black trench coat. He decided against the black skull cap in fear of looking like a 1940s burglar, but the effect was the same. He approached the back door with precise caution, each step calculated and abrupt, like a jungle cat on the prowl. He removed 2 pairs of shackles from his bag, along with a pistol, and shoved them deep into his pockets, along with his gloves, to maintain his quiet approach. He left the bag at the base of the steps, slightly hidden from view but easily accessible. He filled his coat pockets with extra ammunition in case he became too excited and missed. He reached for the door handle and discovered, much to his delight, that it was unlocked. He opened the door slowly, listening for any sounds coming from inside. Stepping inside, Dietrich found himself in a long hallway facing the kitchen. He hid in the first room on his right, a small half-bathroom. Once he was sure no one was around, he snuck out and continued into the house. After a quiet and rapid search, he realized that no one was home. "Well, that's disappointing," he said to himself. Dejected, he was moments from leaving when he heard the faint sound of a hammer on wood not too far from where he stood. He ran back to the front of the house and looked through the curtains of the front windows. Sure enough, there was someone in the barn banging away at 2x4 boards sitting on a sawhorse. Suddenly rejuvenated, he smiled wide and trekked back outside and around the house to the barn. As Dietrich got closer, he was clearly able to see who was working in the barn. It was definitively the target of his plan, Arthur Stevens. Heart racing, Dietrich drew his weapon and entered the barn. He approached without making the slightest of sounds, or so he thought. The sound of Arthur's voice took him by surprise and forced him to stop just a few yards away. "You never have been very sneaky, son," Arthur said with a chuckle. "Now hand me that." He turned around and stopped abruptly when he realized that it wasn't Marcus who was attempting to catch him by surprise. Both men stood there silently for a moment, feeling the tension in the room rise to a fever pitch. Neither man spoke, but they both began to move. Slowly, measured, they each walked around each other like predators in the wild. The silence was deafening, broken only when Arthur finally spoke. "You killed my wife," he shouted through gritted teeth. "You killed my father," Dietrich hissed back. "Prepare to die." Dietrich faked a lunge to Arthur's right side, raising his arm in an exaggerated swinging motion. Arthur, seeing this and preparing a counterattack, stepped to his left, knocking over the sawhorse and all the wood setting on it. Taking advantage of the distraction, Dietrich spun around Arthur in the opposite direction, whipping out one of the shackles and dropping to a knee in one motion. Before Arthur could recover, Dietrich had clamped one around his bare wrist. Confused and angry, Arthur spun to face his attacker. He kicked him to the ground, and looking to get to higher ground, leapt in the direction of the rafters. To his surprise and Dietrich's delight, Arthur fell face first in the middle of the barn, less than a yard from where he stood. Dietrich stood up, smiling wickedly. He strolled over to where Arthur had landed. Arthur, unaware of what was happening to him, continued his attempt to leap away. Diedrich laughed before kicking Arthur hard in the gut, crumpling the old man on the ground. He continued his assault, kicking him repeatedly until his leg was tired, then switched legs and kicked a few more times. Arthur gasped and groaned as each blow connected and laid motionless when the attack ceased. Diedrich knelt by Arthur and rolled him over on his back, looking him in the eye. "You are powerless," he whispered, "and the worst is yet to come." He attached the other cuff of the shackle to Arthur's other wrist, then dragged the old man across the barn near the horse stables. He forcibly sat him up against the door, horses neighing behind it. Diedrich unhooked his pistol from his belt and loaded it, looking Arthur in the eye the entire time. "Farewell." Diedrich pulled the trigger and watched as the bullet seemed to move in slow motion towards his foe. It moved so slowly, in fact, that it stopped completely. Then a stream of ice flowed from the bullet all the way back to the gun, stopping Diedrich from firing another round. Before he could react, he felt a hand on the back of his neck and both his feet came off the ground. He was spun around roughly, still held by the throat up in the air. He was face to face with Blaze. "I think you made a mistake coming here," Blaze threatened. "It's time for you to go." Diedrich felt the two of them turn to leave and was suddenly and abruptly thrown halfway across the barn and slid on the floor, stopping only when he reached the opposite wall. Taking a deep breath to gather himself, he slowly rolled over just in time to see Blaze fall to his knees, then face down on the ground. He was wrapped in an electric trapping net, unconscious. He looked up to see Erica standing proudly, holding her grandfather's greatest weapon. "Didn't I tell you to stay with the truck?" Diedrich asked breathlessly. "I brought it with me," Erica replied matter-of-factly, stepping out of the way and pointing behind her. It was parked awkwardly, and the back door was sliding up and down loosely. "I saw things going poorly and figured you needed my assistance." "I think it's time you start driver's training." Diedrich hugged his child and thanked her for helping him. "Come, we aren't done just yet." They spent the next hour cleaning up the mess that was made during the scuffle. Then they cleared a spot in the center of the barn. Diedrich pulled the box truck through the doors and parked it. Erica shut and locked the doors behind him, and Diedrich jumped out to help load the bodies. They started with Blaze, still unconscious from the net. They untangled him and carried him by his hands and feet into the truck, where Diedrich attached the shackles to his wrists and suspended him from the ceiling. Next was Arthur. A little heavier and harder to move, Diedrich mostly dragged him alone, before throwing him over his shoulder to get him onto the truck. Erica attached his shackles while her father caught his breath. Diedrich walked over to Arthur with a smirk curling his lips and his chin high in the air. Arthur, who was awake although beaten and bloodied, stared back with an intense hatred. He then turned his attention to Blaze. He walked directly in front of him before ripping the mask off his face. Diedrich then slapped him hard twice, waking him from his daze. What happened?" Marcus asked, drooling, eyes glazed over and unfocused. "You lost," Diedrich replied, shooting a winning wink at Erica. "And now father and son can both die by my hands." And that's the end of chapter 14 of Junior Blaze, Birth of a Hero. Like I said, check out the links, peep the page, like, subscribe, join me on Facebook, Junior Blaze 2020, and there'll be more updates, more things coming in the future. So, holla at your boy.